Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the Skandalaris Center for Interdisciplinary Innovation and Entrepreneurship for this conversation with Jim McKelvey. My name is Diva Harsour, and I am a rising junior at WashU studying math and computer science. I am also a Skandalaris Entrepreneurial Fellow, interning with a St. Louis startup called Fast Democracy this summer. It is my honor to open this event for you all today. As Washington University's hub of innovation and entrepreneurship, the Skandalaris Center is committed to providing a collaborative and welcoming event experience. Today's event is part of our Skandalaris Startup Webinar Series, a platform for our alumni to share the knowledge and talents that have set them on a path of professional purpose, share their expertise, and support the entrepreneurial endeavors of our community of innovators and entrepreneurs. It is also a part of our Skandalaris internship program, with the Skandalaris interns all joining this event. Please note that all attendees are muted for today's event. The conversation will be followed by a Q&A. Please submit your questions via the chat function. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our guest. Jim McKelvey is a serial entrepreneur, inventor, philanthropist, artist, and author of The Innovation Stack, building an unbeatable business one crazy idea at a time. He is the co-founder of Square and served as the chairman on its board until 2010 and still serves on the board of directors. In 2011, his iconic card reader design was inducted into the Museum of Modern Art. Jim also founded Invisibly, Launch Code, and Third Degree Glass Factory. He is also a deputy chair of the St. Louis Federal Reserve. Jim is an alum of WashU with degrees in computer science and fine art. In 2010, Jim and his wife Anna provided a naming gift to the McKelvey School of Engineering, demonstrating Jim's commitment to WashU and fostering innovation across campus. Moderating today's chat is the Managing Director of the Skandalaris Center for Interdisciplinary Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and Assistant Vice Provost for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, Luscri.
All right, Diva, thank you very much for the introduction and for giving us an opportunity to connect and get involved here on this conversation with Jim McKelvey. Looks like Jim may be muted. But I have a few questions and things to get us started off with for the conversation today. So first of all, Jim, I just want to say congratulations on the book. It was a great read. I really enjoyed it. And in fact, everyone, all kinds of people had recommended this book to me without even knowing that you had a Washington University connection. I think that naturally people are like, oh, you know, this great WashU alumnus wrote a book too. It's about entrepreneurship. You should read it. But people were making that recommendation without even knowing about your WashU connection. So really excited to talk about the book with you and learn a little bit more about it. And I wanted to maybe have you start off by just giving a high level definition of what the innovation stack is for our audience, just to level set some of our discussion today.
Yeah, so the book is titled The Innovation Stack, and the question is, what the heck is that? And the answer is, it's this pattern that I found. And it's a pattern that I'd never found discussed before. And I needed to label it. But it's sort of this vague concept of the way innovation is actually done. And the reason I wrote the book was because something very strange happened at Square. When we were about 4 years old, Amazon copied our product and undercut our price and expected to just kill us. And their expectation was probably well-founded, because whenever Amazon does this to a startup, they always win. And I say always because in 2014, when Amazon did this to us, we looked for other companies that had survived an Amazon attack, and there were none. And so, Jack and I kind of looked at each other and it's like, well, this isn't good. And so we immediately looked for best practices against Amazon and found that there are none. You basically just give up. But we didn't give up. And a year later, Amazon gave up. And miraculously, Amazon mailed a little Square reader to all their soon-to-be former customers, which was mind-blowing. Like, that was just mind-blowing, that not only had we survived, but we'd actually gotten Amazon to sort of give up and sort of wave the white flag. And so I was happy we won, but I couldn't explain what happened. And it was sort of it's sort of like if you were thrown out of an airplane without a parachute and you lived, you would want to know why you lived, because most people who fall, free fall, for 2 miles, die. And we didn't. And so we were very happy that we won, but I personally was consumed with answering the question of what had happened. And so what I started doing, because I couldn't find any more contemporary examples of companies that had lived through an Amazon attack, I looked through companies in other industries that had been attacked, equally viciously in their own ways. And I found this very strange pattern, and that is these little startups that really didn't have much expertise in their particular industry ended up doing this series of things that allowed them to withstand these horrific attacks and then dominate their industry. Like, if you look at the biggest bank in the world, it was started by a guy who was a produce vendor. If you look at the biggest furniture company in the world, it was started, kid who was 17 years old. If you look at, and I saw these examples after examples. And so the thing that led me to write the book was I did all this historical research. And then, since this is an academic setting, I guess I can explain. Historical research is usually terrible, because what typically happens is the authors tend to pick examples that just support their thesis. So I probably was guilty of this. And so I needed to find somebody who had lived through it and could corroborate my theories. And so I found, among all the people that I'd studied, one of them was still alive, and it was Herb Kelleher, the founder of Southwest Airlines. So I went to Herb, and I spent an afternoon with him in Dallas, basically showing him my research and saying, Herb, what do you think? Is this right? Is it what happened at Southwest? Because I thought there was a parallel between Southwest and Square. But what did Herb think? He loved it. He was like, you got to write this. He's like, you need to share this with the world. And so Herb basically convinced me to write another book. So I wrote the book, but it was funny. I didn't actually want to write a business book, because business books are really boring. At least the ones I've read are they're like a bad homework assignment. So I didn't want to write one of those. So I wrote a graphic novel. So my thing was all cartoons. It was, pen and ink and, buildings exploding and Nazis and murders and, all sorts of really good stuff. But because actually it turns out in the stories there were Nazis and murders and all sorts of terrible stuff happening. But the time I finished the graphic novel, I called Herb. It took me like a year to get this thing together. And I called Herb and I told him, I said, well, I took your advice, Mr. Kelleher, but I took it one step further. I said, I wrote a really cool graphic novel. And Herb hated that idea. He thought that, frankly, I was trivializing this very important concept, this very important theory, and that I should write a book, a proper business book, not just some, sort of comic treatment. And he asked to be left out. He said, if you're going to do a comic book, I don't want to be in it. And of course, Herb was like he's this like deity-like figure in my life, and I wasn't going to leave him out. So I rewrote the book for Herb as a non-comic, but then I also did a comic as a side thing. But the basic book with Herb in it and all the stories is what's out there. And the reason I did this was because the phenomenon that I observed was normal people, just plain old folks who didn't have any particular skills, were able to go into these industries in which they knew nothing. And, when Jack and I started Square 10 years ago, I guess it was 11 years ago, we didn't know anything about payments. Like, Jack was a massage therapist. I'm a glassblower. I've got a degree in economics. Oh, by the way, Diva, my second degree from WashU was not in art. It's in economics, so computer science and economics. But the point is, look, we weren't qualified in payments. And here we start this payment company that's, somewhere around $40 billion today. So how is that possible? And the answer is there's this really powerful phenomenon called the innovation stack, which, if you follow the process, produces these world-changing companies. And I thought it was important enough to share. So that's why I wrote a book.
Yeah, so why a book? Why are they using that medium to, because I hear you exactly. You've come across this, you've made the discovery, you've seen the pattern. You can't not tell the story. Why use a book?
Well, I'm not famous. So, if I was famous, I could just jump on TV or something and tell everybody. But the book was an important format for me because, first of all, I wanted to be academically rigorous. And if you've read the book, you've seen the footnotes. So, I'm not that rigorous. But, I do take a formal approach to this because I believe crap science is something that we should fight against. So I wanted to have that level of rigor. And the book publication process with vetting by agents and editors, and I mean, tiers of reviewers seemed like a better way to do it. But I also wanted something that was accessible. So, it was sort of a striking balance between a pure academic thing that would probably never be read. And then, so I don't use any social media. I don't know if you know this about me, but like if you see me on social media, that's not me. Those are, PR companies that are trying to sell my book now. But I have no platform to engage except for the written word. And I still respect the written word. I think it's a really good way to communicate.
And you said to write another book. Can you tell us about your first book?
Yeah. So the first book I wrote was when I was a freshman at WashU. I wrote a computer science text to replace my professor's terrible text. I was, I'm sure some students listening will have had this experience. Like you take a class and the prof makes you buy his or her text, and it's a piece of crap, but you have to pay whatever, I don't know what textbook costs now. Like back then it was $40, but they're probably $100 now. But I was really upset that I had to buy this terrible book. And as a freshman, I vowed that I would replace it with something. And so I had to write my replacement to my professor's book, which turned out to actually be a really good thing because it let me experience what it was like to, sort of be respected as an engineer. And I was not a particularly good engineer. There were a lot of really good engineers when I was studying, and I wasn't particularly one of them. But because I had published, that gives you elevated status. And so what happened was I was able to get placed on the best teams. And being a member of a top performing team is hugely important. And I learned how to do that as a freshman. So I wrote a couple of books, and then I wrote another textbook on glass blowing back, actually for WashU again. I was teaching a glass blowing class that had 150 students in it. And I needed a textbook, and there were no textbooks because the glass world is very secretive. And so I decided to write a book. So I think I may still have the #1 textbook on glass blowing. So there you go. Book number 4.
That's great. You mentioned sharing the graphic novel version of the book with Herb, and him not liking it. When you went back to start writing more a standard book, who did you trust? Who did you give notes to? Who did you ask for notes from? Asking for feedback as you moved along with that. What was that process like for you in writing the book?
So it was weird because I tried to hire a ghostwriter because I thought, oh, well, I got a bunch of money. I can just buy my way out of this problem. It turns out that ghostwriters, at least the ones that I found, I went through about 3 of them. They write this sort of standard business drivel that I can't even stand. So I just couldn't see my name on any of that. So I fired all the ghostwriters, and then I just basically locked myself in a room for a year. And every day just pounded out the book. But then I did this series of revisions. So it's not the writing, it's the editing. I wrote the book in about a year, and it took me 2 years to edit it down. That's including changing formats. So I mean, but the basic idea came together pretty quickly. But to make something that's fun to read, at least for me, is really difficult. But if you don't keep the reader engaged, if you don't tell something that makes you smile, if you don't, crack a joke, or at least say something that's, that's thought-provoking, like every other page or so, people's attention span these days is so, it's so diminished. I mean, we have so many options for better content that I couldn't publish something that I didn't want to read. And most of the stuff that I read, I skim. And I was like, well, if that's all I'm producing, then this is a pointless exercise. So the book went through 8 drafts, and it was brutal,
Yeah.
Actually, I'll tell you the story how I found my editor. So I had a friend who I went to high school with, and she was in a coma, and she was recovering for her coma. And I thought, oh, well, Amy's recovering for a coma, so I'll go read the book to her because she's literally bedridden and can't leave, right? So the first person to hear the book was my friend Amy, who was, basically semi-paralyzed. But she liked it. And she said, well, I got nothing to do, and I can, kind of not move part of my face. So why don't I help you beat up some of it. And because Amy and I have known each other from high school, she was really brutal on me. Like she's not intimidated by all the square stuff or any of that other noise. So Amy was just vicious. And like, you want somebody who editing you who is vicious, who will tell you that you're stupid or wordy or pedantic, or like, just like, you don't want an editor who is nice. And she was perfect.
Yeah, it sounds like, the type of person you want that's giving you startup advice too. You want somebody that's not going to sugarcoat it, that's going to give you the real insight into what's happening, not just, oh, this is a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, manners are too easy. I learned that when I was a glass blower. I mean, I would make two pieces of glass and I would put them both in front of somebody and I'd say, which one do you prefer? And they would always say something nice about both of them. And so I learned that I could never get an honest answer if I asked somebody. But what I could do is I could put a price tag on them and then leave the room and then see which one sold. And so over time, I learned to trust pricing as a signal of quality as opposed to people's spoken opinion, because people, we are trained to be nice and to not criticize. And unfortunately, if you're trying to refine a product, criticism, honest criticism is very valuable, but it's also very dangerous for the critic. So most people won't put themselves in the position of being critics.
So when you graduated from WashU, the Skandalaris Center didn't exist, but the university now has placed a high priority on innovation and entrepreneurship, and doing that in a multidisciplinary way. So the center engages artists, philosophers, engineers, social workers, everyone on campus around entrepreneurship and startups. I wanted to hear a little bit from you about how your work as an artist, how the glass blowing, how that has influenced your life and your companies, and sort of how you bring that into the startups, the technologies that you advance.
Oh, well, I mean, glass is a huge part of my life. I'm in the studio right now working on a new product. I've been doing it for a couple of months with another sort of WashU affiliate, David Levy, who's father taught at the school. Here's the thing about art. It is one of the few professions where originality is valued. And you sit there and you say, well, we value originality in business. And the answer is no, you don't. And the way you can figure that out is go try to get a bank loan with original idea. And if you go into a bank and you have an original idea, i.e. something that has never been done before, and you say, please loan me money so I can do this, the bank will say, go get lost. If you go into the same bank and you say, I am an expert in this thing that everybody has done and everybody knows how to do, and I'm going to do it again, they'll say, how much money do you want? You're completely fundable if you are unoriginal. But in the art world, if you're unoriginal, you are irrelevant. So art is one of the few industries where originality is actually valued. And one of the things that I, stress in my book and of course in my research is that original thinking is really different than copying. And if you're going to copy, which is probably what you should do in almost every case, like if you're trying to make money, you're trying to solve a problem, like if you need a heart bypass, like you probably don't want to invent a new heart bypass operation for you. Like I would not, if I have to have a heart operation, what I want to do is find a surgeon who's done the damn thing 100 times, can do it, can do it in her sleep and just knows that cold. I don't want them learning anything on me, But in the world of entrepreneurship, because we have to solve new problems by the traditional definition of entrepreneur, then there's just no resources. So the fact that Skandalaris is sort of glomming together these, sort of interdisciplinary teams, I think it's really positive. But the question is, what's the role of the artist? I don't know, but I've certainly gotten a lot out of my association with the art world.
Yeah, in the book you talk about the copies, right? About how the thing you do is you come in and you copy, and we as human beings, right? We're copies, and
we are copies.
Yeah. It's sort of that perpetuation. So I like that analogy in thinking about how in the art world, copies are not okay, right? Copies are significantly frowned against. And when it comes to, startups and original company ideas, it's harder to push them through, just like you said with the banks and that. But that idea of really being able to advance something, I think there's a lot we can learn from how people embrace and interact in the art world. Did you design the book cover, or how did you come to that?
No, the book cover was a mess. We did a bunch of things. I actually had a idea of a stack of children's blocks. That was sort of my idea for the cover, and the publisher went from this thing that looked like a squished rainbow. And again, I wanted to publish with one of the major publishing houses because of the scrutiny that they put on products like this. Like, I didn't want to just get published like self-publishing, or I didn't want to skip any of the steps, because like I was looking for almost every excuse I could find to not write this thing, because it was a massive pain in the neck. And didn't need the money. I didn't really want the attention, so the only upside for me in this book was that I just felt guilty seeing this pattern and not sharing it with the world. Like, I just think that just seems inappropriate to, like, if you discovered something that could actually truly help people and you don't share it, that just seems wrong to me. So, I mean, I've preached that for years, and then I find this thing and I'm like, well, I guess I got to do it. So, but it's not going to drag me into social media. Like, you're not going to find me online. I will have to get a certain level of notoriety just because the publishing world demands that. But like, got a question about Square? Why do you tweet it to Dorsey? Okay, let Jack. You got a question about launch code? Yeah, I'll defer that to Jeff. You want to talk about. So I really try to stay out of the focus. Yeah. It's sort of incompatible with publishing these days, but that's what I'm doing.
So you brought up Jack, and one of the things that I found interesting in the book is the discovery that Jack was your intern at Mira. Yes. back in the mid '90s. And so, given that we have a bunch of Skandalaris summer interns on the call today and in the audience, I thought maybe they could hear from you sort of about how to, as an intern, what did Jack do that was so phenomenal that you saw later on he became your boss, right? And so you talk about that in the book. And so what was that sort of experience like, and how might they, as in an internship, take advantage of the opportunity they have?
Yeah, I mean, I was Jack's first boss, and he was my first boss, and that was kind of a funny twist. Look, it was really simple. Jack showed up when he was 15 years old. We hired him to do, sort of non-specific work around the office, but everything he did really well, and I noticed the pattern. And, if you do something well, not always, but sometimes someone will notice. So if you're cleaning up and you clean up exceptionally well, and the person who asked you to clean something up notices, they would be stupid to not give you more responsibility. And so over time, what I did with Jack, because I didn't care that he was 15, I gave him more and more responsibility. And by the time he was 16, he was managing a team of 30-year-olds. And the 30-year-olds were kind of put off by that, but I told them, look, you either work for this guy or you don't work here. So they got over it fast. And Jack was very competent. And, I sort of jokingly called him Jack the Genius, because Jack is a very soft-spoken guy. And, when he was 15, he was, pretty shy. So, sort of teasing him, he was always known to me as Jack the Genius. Yeah, he was always this exceptional kid. And he grew into an exceptional adult. And so, I was really happy when he asked me to start a new company with him after they kicked him out of Twitter the first time. So it's been a good association. But, I guess maybe I'll put this in the context of, some of the stuff that's going on right now. any bias that you have, be it that a 15-year-old can't run a team, or that programmers or people look a certain way, or age, like Launch Code, this is the nonprofit that I started. Our number one bias is not gender, it's not race, it's age. People don't trust programmers who are over 40 years old. They think people who are over 40 can't code. But anytime you have one of those biases, you limit the potential of people that you could work with. And so I was just really lucky because I'm sure I've got a bunch of biases, but age isn't one of them, So I don't care how old you are or what you look like. I'll give you the task. If you do the task well, I'm going to give you more tasks. So that seemed to be true in Jack's case.
And you guys are a couple St. Louis guys, connected here in St. Louis, and have done great work together. And I know St. Louis is important to you. You're investing in the office downtown for Square, and for us, seeing entrepreneurship as a lever to advance the city and advance the region. What can we expect out of that development and some of the other priorities? I mean, you mentioned Launch Code. Some of your other priorities for St. Louis specifically.
Well, what I try to do is not invest, but overinvest. So if you look at the math of the investment in the Post-Dispatch building, by any sort of real estate metrics, I'm an idiot. And you could prove it, right? The amount of money we're spending on that is irresponsible if you view it as a real estate play. But I don't view it as a real estate play. I view it as a talent play. And to me, if I can put, a couple thousand people in a building and have every one of those people who walk into that building feel inspired because they're looking in the coolest space in 500 miles, then the potential payoff to that is billions of dollars, not hundreds of millions. And that is what I'm expecting to happen down there. Now, is that going to work? I don't know. I have no idea if it's going to work. Has anyone done it before? No. So I don't get to, copy somebody, but it just seems to me that we've got so much talent in St. Louis. And one of the things that I always noticed is that when I went out to Square's offices, in Melbourne or Tokyo or San Francisco, I just felt great. We had high ceilings, we had bright, beautiful furniture, like it was just gorgeous. And you felt respected. Like even if you had like the lowest job in the company, you felt respected by the space. And when I went into our space here in St. Louis, which is in Cortex, and Cortex is perfectly adequate space, it's, arguably decent, but it's not inspiring. Like it's not going to make you smile when you walk in. And so I was like, God damn it, I'm going to build a place when people walk in, they smile. The other thing is the Post-Dispatch building had its entrance on the south side of the building, which has always pissed me off that, sort of the rich and powerful people in this town have always turned their backs on the north. So we are spending like a ridiculous amount of money. Like an unnecessary expenditure of tens of millions of dollars to literally turn the building around and put the entrance on the north side. Now, I think that symbolism will be lost on any non-St. Louisan, but it's important for this St. Louisan. And, I've been saying this for 10 years, but like we've got racism baked into so much part of this city, like just the history of our town and what we've done to divide people, and that shit's got to stop. So that's part of it. And again, I don't have to answer to anybody, so I can be irresponsible. So.
Yeah, well, we certainly appreciate in St. Louis and in the region, and people are taking notice of that. And yeah, I think that's that symbolism. I love that, and I think that's a great part of the story to tell with what you're doing. I have one more question for now, and then I'm going to turn it over to some of our Skandalaris team members to ask you some questions. In your book, you referenced a couple food entrepreneurs who have St. Louis and WashU's connections. You mentioned my friend and your friend Howard Lerner, and you mentioned Danny Meyer and Shake Shack. Have you ever thought of a food venture, of a restaurant or some type of business in that space? Maybe chocolate covered espresso beans. I know those are a Jim
Yeah.
McKelvey favorite.
Well, yeah. So we used to buy chocolate covered espresso beans from Jack's mom, Marcia Dorsey's Shenandoah Coffee. She used to sell us that before Ritalin was commonly available. Howard Lerner, one of my best friends, actually taught entrepreneurship at WashU, and I make fun of that effort. Actually, I let Howard make fun of that effort in the book, because it's a hilarious story about what happened to Howard when he was trying to teach entrepreneurship. But food ventures, yeah, I mean, honestly, if you look at what we're doing in Del Mar, Doug Auer and what he's doing at Third Degree and Made, there is a rooftop at Made. If you'll drive by the Made building, which is this makerspace on Del Mar, north side of Del Mar, by the way, you notice that we have a 2-story building with a 3-story elevator. So I think something cool is going to happen on the roof, and I don't know what it is, but my guess is that people up there will be hungry. So it is potential space, but again, I don't know anything about restaurants. So I would have to find somebody who is really interested in doing something cool. But if you are one of these people and you want to do something really cool, yeah, we got a place for you to color.
Great. Okay, Jim, I'm going to introduce the 3 members of the Skandalaris Center team. They've been collecting and corralling questions from our audience. There have been a lot of questions coming in, a lot of things people have submitted to the center in advance that they're excited to talk with you about. Sydney Everett is our marketing and communications specialist. Ashton Megley is our Brown School practicum student, and Jessica Weldon is our assistant director of programs. So what they're going to do now is moderate some of the questions that have come in from the community. So I'm going to turn it over to them.
Hi, Jim. Thank you for joining us today. It's been a great conversation so far. The first few questions I'm going to ask have come from students who are participating in our summer internship program, as you mentioned. So the first question actually comes from Diva, who introduced you. She asked, based on your experience with Invisibly and the work you're doing to save journalism through a business solution, do you believe good for-profit solutions to different types of societal issues are feasible? Or is there something that happened or something going on that makes the work that you're doing special?
Well, yes. I mean, I believe market solutions tend to be the best if you can get the market right. And in Invisibly's case, one of the things that I believe is important is that each of us right now has lost our economic voice when it comes to content consumption. And what I mean by that is that when you go out and you buy something, what you spend are effectively little votes. So I just bought an Impossible Burger for lunch today. It was $6 or something. I don't know what it was, but it was an expensive hamburger, right? $6 for a burger. And there's no meat in that burger. So what am I voting for? Well, I'm voting for plant-based foods. I'm voting for probably a lower carbon footprint. I'm also probably voting for disgusting fast food. And I'm voting for Burger King and a few other things that might not be cool. But the point is that the way the economy works is all our spending is essentially a signal to the market of what to produce. And you would say, well, that's a great way to produce content too, but it turns out that we don't have that voice when we consume content, because most of the content that we consume is advertising supported. And in an advertising situation, if I trick you into watching something for 10 seconds and you hate it, I get the same amount of money as if I create 10 seconds that you love. And that's the problem, because most of the content is advertising supported, and because the constraint on that content has been eliminated, we are now in a world where the cheapest content wins, and that is not a world that I want to live in. I want to live in a world where I, as a consumer, can pay more for things that I like and pay less for things that I don't like. I don't want to live in a business model where the people who make the most money are the ones who make the cheapest crap. So that's what Invisibly is doing. Now, I'll preface that by saying Invisibly is theoretical. We've been at it for 3 years. We do not yet have a system that works. We have parts of a system that work, and I hope that we can stitch the whole thing together, but so far we haven't.
Thank you for that. So the next question comes from Jack Brophy, and his question is, What are some of the pain points in the transition from running a startup to being the CEO of a much larger organization that you experienced? And how did you prepare for that transition?
I prepared for it by leaving. So I don't run any organizations. So I don't run LaunchCode, I don't run Square, I don't run Third Degree, I don't run Invisibly. I don't want to run them. I don't run Mira. I'm a guy that comes in and solves a problem with a team, typically a problem that's never been solved before, and then I get the hell out of the way. I'm not saying that that's a admirable set of behaviors. You've got people, who will become founders and then they become CEO. I'm not particularly good at the administrative part of operating a business. I don't enjoy it. And frankly, I'm not the person that would be best to do it. So in Square's case, Jack wanted to be the CEO and I didn't want to be the CEO. So that was a really easy conversation. In the case of my other companies, I've always looked for somebody who has, great operational strength, because I don't have great operational strength. So I really don't have an answer to the question. I mean, I think you'd like the answer to the question, like, well, you do this when you're at the beginning and then you do this at the end. Like, I never get past the beginning. Like, by the time, like, I left Square after a year and a half. I got the thing running. I was a chairman, and I basically did everything because Jack was on the road for a while, and then Jack came back, and then he started doing more, and then we got the product working, and I was like, I'm out. I mean, because like we had hired at that point people that were better than me at everything I was doing. So yeah, I just get out of the way.
Smart. So the next question comes from Rachel Cooligan, and she asked, when did you know you had what it took to be an entrepreneur?
God. I don't know. I mean, it was never a moment, and I still don't know that I have what it takes, because of course, by my definition of an entrepreneur, which is somebody who's done something that hasn't been done before, in each case, I question myself. So when I started Third Degree, which had never been done before, like nobody had ever opened up a glass studio that was effectively a teaching studio. Prior to Third Degree, every glass studio in the world was basically a private studio or some sort of foundation thing. We opened up a school, and that was not the way people did it, but it worked out phenomenally well. And I questioned myself the whole time. When we opened LaunchCode, which looks like a boot camp, but it's really a job placement system that guarantees to get a job for you as a programmer. But nobody had ever done that before, so we couldn't copy it. So I questioned myself there. Same thing with Square. I mean, Jack and I had no qualifications and payments. We were doing something that had never been done before. So like, and this, by the way, is one of the reasons I wrote the book, okay, is because we tend to have this hero story. And if you listen to the business press or to, well, pretty much anybody, we tend to try to make heroes out of people who have done really amazing things. And what that does is it separates us from our potential, because if you think that somebody who's going to start, $1 billion company has different qualities than you have, you will sit there and disqualify yourself. And when I was writing the book, I had a very specific person in mind, and I know her very well, and she's very, very competent. And yet when she encounters a problem where she is not officially solved the problem, she says, well, I can't do this. And my answer to her is, okay, that's appropriate sometimes, but it's really inappropriate at other times. Isn't solved by others, and you can become qualified. Of course, become qualified. You want to fly a plane today, go get certified as a pilot. Okay, go get type rated and all that other stuff. You become a pilot. But if every person on the planet waited until they were a certified pilot, we would not have airplanes, because Orville and Wilbur Wright flew the first plane and they weren't qualified. Nobody could be qualified. So I see these people who have these tremendous skills, and this tremendous ability sitting on the sidelines because they say, well, wait a second, I don't have great vision. I'm not a genius. I'm not young enough or strong enough or rich. Whatever sort of disqualifier you want to put in there, they will make an excuse that in some cases is just a load of crap. So in my book, what I do is I basically show that there's this extremely powerful force that normal people, like a glass blower, like, I mean, the guy who started the biggest bank in the world, you know what he did? He was a produce vendor. Like, he sold lettuce, builds the biggest bank in the world. Starts at age 32 and he was a produce vendor. Again and again, if you look through history, you will see that industries are changed by people who have no qualifications. So that's a very empowering message. And again, that's one of the reasons I felt like I had to write this thing, because like, I want people to understand that there is tremendous power in doing things the right way, even if you're unqualified to do it.
Cool, thank you. So the final question I have before I pass it on to Ashton is, how do you coax out creative ideas? Do you find you're more creative when you have the right music, lighting, food, something else? And if there is something that really helps you get your creative juices flowing, when did you realize what works for you?
I don't have a process except maybe frustration. Like, the process for me is usually begins, I hate to admit this, with some sort of, I'm not a very angry person, but something's really upset me. Okay. So if I get pissed off enough about something, I say, I got to do something about this. And that usually gets me going. In the case of Square, I was upset because I lost a sale. I mean, I had this piece of glass, I was trying to sell it. I lost the sale, and Jack and I had already agreed to start a company together. We just hadn't chosen an idea. And then all of a sudden I get pissed off and I call up Jack and I'm like, look, I know what we got to do. And that's what became Square. So in my case, I look for an energy source. And I say energy source, in addition to being sort of crummy manager, I also have real motivational problems. Like, I'm a guy who, basically would lie around and do nothing when other people would be up at work with their teeth brushed and stuff. And so in order to counteract my laziness, I wait until a problem calls to me. And then I find that the fact that I care about solving that problem gives me this extra source of energy. So it's a coping mechanism, basically. And I see a photo of Sydney, but I don't hear anything.
All right. Guess I'm next. Hi, Jim. Thanks for speaking with us today. So following up from that, solving problems, I have some questions that were submitted on the impact of current times on entrepreneurship.
Sure.
So Square recently recognized Juneteenth with a day off for all employees. Could you address the internal processes that went behind that decision?
Well, we thought about it and seemed like a right thing to do. I mean, I honestly don't think companies are going to do as much as lawmakers in this environment, but you do what you can do. Under Jack's leadership, this has been, it's been a topic for us for years, and now we've got this sort of moment where we can make a gesture. And so it is a gesture, but I think it's important. And I think gestures matter, especially in the context of, times of change. What you're doing essentially is you want to create a herd mentality in order to get change through society. Because, you can have mavericks, you can have people who, were talking about carbon sequestration 20 years ago and they were considered crackpots, and now, they're not quite considered mainstream. People who can look past, race. I mean, it's kind of weird because we all we have this moment where some really horrible stuff has happened, but people seem to be talking. So a gesture at that moment can be inspiring to people. And so we make what gestures we can.
Great. And then Aaron Chung, who's an intern this summer, wants to know any advice you have for current entrepreneurs during this pandemic.
So, I mean, I would watch the word entrepreneur and see if you mean business people. Like if you mean business, i.e. you're doing something you're starting a company to make money, which I would define as a business, then I would say watch out because business is being disrupted. So let's differentiate business and entrepreneurship. Business is investable. Business is known. It's predictable. That's not to say something can't go wrong or you don't have to work hard or anything like that, but the risks of a business are infinitesimal compared to the risks of entrepreneurship, where you're trying to do something that has not been done before and therefore may never work. Mm-hmm. But I will answer the question that was asked, which is, if you are an entrepreneur, by my definition, i.e. if you're trying to do something that has never been done before, what are these times like? And the sort of interesting answer is, historically, times of chaos have been disproportionately good for entrepreneurial activities. So Square started in the last recession. So what does that mean? Well, in the middle of a recession, all the big banks are on their heels. The credit card companies are reeling. Retailers are in trouble. And that's a great time to recruit talent, to come up with new products, to get meetings, because people aren't as busy as they would be in a boom time. So I really think that, look, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you are going to be in chaos much of your life. You will just have stuff blowing up that your business colleagues who call themselves entrepreneurs don't have. They don't have the problems that you will have. Okay. But today, I got a spam call in the middle of this. Hope I didn't. Did I just hang up on everybody? Are you still there?
Yes. You were muted
Okay.
for a bit, but now you're back.
Sorry about that. Samsung, worst phone there is. But I carry it for a reason, because iPhones are for, anyway. I bank at the worst bank. I carry the worst cell phone, and I know what people are living through. But anyway, if you're an entrepreneur, your business life is certainly going to be chaotic, and you will have a better time relative to everybody else if you are in a period of chaos. And what I noticed with these entrepreneurial companies is that every one of them faced a sort of major problem. So take the biggest bank in the world, started by a produce vendor. Well, he launched that bank not in New York, but he launched it in San Francisco a year before the great San Francisco earthquake. Talk about chaos. Mm-hmm. COVID-19 is bad, but we didn't lose a third of our population and have our city burned to the ground. That's what happened, after the great San Francisco earthquake. So, history teaches us again and again that for some reason, these moments of great upheaval tend to favor true entrepreneurs almost at the expense of business people. Because if things are working right and predictable, you probably want to be a business person with a formula that works. But if you don't have the formula written yet and you're in chaos, it's also good that kind of everybody around you is in chaos as well. Sort of evens the field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My final question, just wrapping that up. Do you have any other opinions on current events in addition to the pandemic, the greater lens on racial injustice, protests, economic crises, as well as the upcoming elections?
No, I have no opinions at all. I mean, officially, I have no opinion on politics because I'm on the Fed. So if you're on the Fed, you basically forswear opinions. I have very strong opinions on most of that stuff, but I'd say my opinions are generally irrelevant. But I would tell you something that is probably a better thing, and that is when I joined the Federal Reserve and I had to become politically neutral, and I was way on one side of the spectrum. You might be able to guess which side. But when I came over to the Fed and they said, you have to be neutral. And then I was neutral through the Trump transition, you know, so from Obama to Trump, I watched the Fed from the inside. And neutrality, especially in times of great sort of rancor, is a very, very powerful tool because it allows you to stay out of the argument long enough to hear the other side. And I think the fact that I've been forced, because of my associations, to be neutral has helped a lot in just being a better person. So I would say on all those topics that you mentioned, I can't think of one in which I don't have a strong opinion, but I would tell you that also I've learned a little bit, and I'm continuing to learn how to temper that opinion and listen to somebody who thinks differently.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. It's really interesting. So next, I'm passing the questions to Jessica. Thank you.
Great, thanks Ashton, and thanks so much for talking with us, Jim, and thanks to everybody who submitted questions ahead of this call. So I have a question from one of our summer interns, Aiden Stern. How do you determine if a venture is going to be the next big thing? Or on the flip side, what happens if everyone is telling you your idea won't work? And is it a good idea to keep moving forward with it?
Well, it depends what you're trying to do. If you are in a business that has a known solution, like you're trying to open up a coffee shop and people from the coffee shop business are telling you that based on their experience, what you're doing is stupid, then you probably should listen to them because they're probably right because there is a formula and you clearly don't know the formula. And since the formula is knowable, they're trying to teach you this formula and you're not listening, which makes you less likely to succeed. But, and again, this is why I wrote the book, right? Because that's 99%, 99.9% of business is known endeavors. But if you were an entrepreneur, if you were doing something that is unknown, then it's almost like the rules flip and you should expect feedback that is negative and get your feedback from people in a business that is close to, but not exactly what you're doing. So I'll give you an example. Southwest Airlines, which became the biggest airline in the country, started as this little, regional carrier in Texas, and they were viciously attacked, like way worse than Square, but they were viciously attacked by all the other airlines who, basically said that it'll never work and it can't work and here's why, and Southwest was breaking all these rules. And in that case, if they're telling you it won't work, look, the fact that it didn't work at United Airlines doesn't mean it won't work at Southwest Airlines if you do everything differently. And so this is the power of the innovation stack. The innovation stack is essentially a collection of things you do differently that differentiate you from the market. It's not 2 or 3 things, it's 12 or 20 things. And if you have an innovation stack, then that feedback flips. So I'm giving you the business answer, which is listen to your peers. And I'm giving you the entrepreneur's answer, which is nobody knows, so you're just as misinformed as everybody else and may as well continue.
Fantastic. Another theme that we saw in questions that came in is what's the most valuable lesson you learned early on when you were starting Square with Mira, and what's one piece of advice that you would give to an entrepreneur?
Most valuable lesson, I don't know. I'll give you a couple of tricks. I don't know that they're the most valuable. One is I never interrupt anybody. I will always leave a pause. I will always let the other person speak first, speak last, speak over me. Even though I think I'm strongly opinionated, I typically don't interrupt anybody. That's been a useful tool over the years. And then as far as sort of tricks, I have always consciously curated things that I don't do. So, well, I haven't always done this, but I learned the tip. Yeah, a guy named Jim Collins, he wrote Good to Great. And when he was writing Good to Great, he and I got to be friends, and he gave me this trick, and I've been using it for 30 years. Basically, make a list of stuff you shouldn't be doing. So on my list is news, social media, certain people, certain activities, certain meetings. Like, I just don't do stuff that normal people do. And as a result, I have way more time than you would expect. Massive amounts of free time, sometimes like toxic amounts of free time. And because of that, it's possible for me to think about stuff that's, beyond just what I need to do to get through the day or the week. And that's a really good trick. So don't do a list. I would strongly recommend that.
That all sounds like fantastic advice. I'm going to hand it back over to Tu to close this out. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for attending. Really appreciate everybody joining the session. Great insights, great questions and interactions. We do have an upcoming Skandalaris startup webinar on July 9th. Pat Mathias will focus on effective communication. If people want to join that, we'd love to have you there. If any of you out there have an idea or want to know what our community is working on, you can start by checking out our Idea Bounce online platform at ideabounce.com. You can share your ideas there, see what people are engaged with and where they need help to move things forward. We are holding a virtual Idea Bounce session on Wednesday, July 1st at 4 o'clock. You can find out more information about that on the Skandalaris Center website. Would love to have you participate in that as well. Jim, I have one final question for you. In the book, you talked about how Square got started in part because you couldn't sell that ugly piece of yellow glass. And now that you could take Amex at the studio, were you able to get the sale done?
Yeah, actually, that piece of yellow glass sold to Square at our, I think, it was either our IPO or we hit some milestone, maybe 1 million customers or something, and Square bought it from me. But it sat on the shelf unsold until that point. Look, I think I think it's important to celebrate when you can, and especially if you're an entrepreneur and things are not likely to work out well, at least in the short term. You should grab every moment you can to raise a glass in celebration. Great. All right, Jim, we really appreciate this, and everyone attending, please do check out the book. It was a really great read, really easy read, and I enjoyed the audiobook version of Jim telling. I read the story and heard the story from Jim's voice, so be sure to check that out. He has a great impression of Herb Kelleher. I mean, it was spot on in the. Except for the smoking, like I can't smoke. Like you can't do a Herb impression unless you got a pack of cool menthols. But you can also go to jimmckelvey.com and get a free copy of the comic book. So like, great. Even if you don't want to read like the textbook thingy, well, it's not a textbook, but it's a business book. But there's a free copy of the comic online. So, go get yourself a comic book about a badass banker. Awesome. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks to the Skandalaris Center team for pulling this off.